So, hello. Um, Sorry, can we start? Hello, one, two, three. Okay, so for the second lecture, I would like to welcome Sabrina Morale and Lorenzo Perry from London-based studio Lemonot. They've both graduated at the Architectural Association in London, and apart from designing practice, they also do some academic activity, and their project have been awarded and exhibited around the world. And just add something from your website. So Lemonot is a platform for spatial and relational practices, architecture and performative art. They work with a wide range of media like pavilions, exhibitions, short films and performances. And that's all. So you're welcome. So
Thank you. Hi everyone, thank you for the invitation first of all. We're very glad to be here. We gather a few examples of our practice that we would like to share with you today. So we're both, Lemonot is our platform where we work in between architecture and performative arts. We're both Italians. We're based in London, and where I am a studio master at the Architecture Association, and Lorenzo is teaching at the Andevante in Vienna. And together we have a studio, ADS 7, at the Royal College of Art as well. I should pass to you.
So I mean, the GIF at the beginning, because like we're based in London, but we've been traveling a lot lately since we graduated and since we started teaching and working in different parts of the world. We've been living and teaching in Thailand, also with familiar faces that we see in the crowd, and like we've been teaching in Latin America and like throughout Europe. Well, I don't know what happens in here. Hopla. Okay, so we work in a very accumulative way. We are really compulsive collectors. If you see our place in London, it's completely populated by different objects, and we tend to, let's say, develop this attitude even when we do projects and when we represent it, when we think about them. I graduated with at the AA, as like it was said in the introduction, with the political brewery. With the Parliament for Informal Politics in Burkina Faso. Sabrina was much cooler than me. And
I constructed a pinball machine, which actually was questioning the role of the architects and the level of authorship that we usually work in project, and how to, I mean, it's a long project, but you had different levels and you could play, and you were appropriating different references, and this is part of the process of creating any architectural project. We're very interested in and fascinated by the language of ordinary rituals and happenings. This is a project that we develop with the Architecture Association with students every year, where we travel to Bolivia and we explore the Altiplano and the festivities as the Gran Poder or the Virgen del Carmen, which take place in the urban space.
For us, it's very important when we do projects to combine geometrical abstractions with figurative inputs. So it was really a fundamental experience for us to understand really how like certain vernacular bits, traditions, and the iconography that comes from it like could be really used for projects. And like these are like interesting examples for the ones of you that don't know them. Like these are buildings constructed by an architect called Freddy Mamani Silvestre in the Altiplano, in the Bolivian Altiplano, that we collaborated with. And what we think that it's very interesting about them, beyond like being nice or not nice, is that they really portray something which is going on in Bolivian society, and perhaps like Bolivia is one of the places where architecture is the most effective discipline to represent like what's going on in the country at the moment. I mean, as we were saying, like we did a lot of experiences in different parts of the world, and like so at first, like before digging a bit more in depth in a couple of projects, we want to show you some of them. This is a project that we did with students, the one before, with students in Thailand, like at INDA, and again, like perhaps that shows really the combination between geometry, figurative inputs, and it was a sort of installation within a gallery. Like we were working with performance, and we were doing like a lot of scenographies and stage sets, and like this idea of like stage sets that like we were trying to pursue in, again, even in other places. This is an installation that we did in Sicily, in south of Italy, that was about redeveloping a terrace of an historical building, where like by placing a mirror, we would like construct a sort of scenography for people like to feel completely different than a conventional urban environment.
We use architecture as a supporting structures for things to happen. So sometimes we are architects, some other times we're facilitators, some other times we're just like constructing different temporary either events or props at the theater, almost like a theatrical scale, that allow us to meet with people and engage with people.
That was, I mean, this thing was interesting for us. Like it was about constructing an itinerant lunch, and like how do you really work with materials which are not conventional? Like how do you paint with tomatoes? How do you address like a performative lunch? How do you somehow make people eat in a completely different way? So in here, like they had to go through a journey between like things that would be at the same time pots, tables. The idea of the table is something that we're always very fond of. Like this is one of the first workshops that we were doing with students at FA VUT, which is a festival that happens not far away from Budapest in the Hungarian countryside.
Just to mention this, the construction, it was divided between the students, and each one of them had their own piece. And therefore, this piece was acting at the same time as a mask, as a performative medium, to inhabit the table, and then collectively it was making a large table set.
If, for example, as Sabrina was saying in the piece before, negotiation was one of the keywords, like how do you construct something collectively? Like even something very simple, so a circular table, but really how do you negotiate the boundaries of your mask with the ones of your colleagues? Like, so how do you really work as a collective? Something that we're always very keen of, and like that might appear very simple, but it's interesting, is the idea of time when we make pieces. For example, this is called marble salad, and like it's a very simple project, but like what was important for us like is really understanding time. How long does it take to do something like that? On one hand, perhaps to assemble it, one afternoon or 2 days, because like it's a dry construction. There are like marble leftovers assembled on a 4x4 stage, but like in reality, it took us more than a month because the budget was a zero budget. So we had to understand how to really collect like these pieces, how to convince people about like the goodness of the project, and how like to construct an aesthetic with things that like we couldn't fully control. And also like the idea of time, like this project, Marble Salad, is something that anticipates the construction of a vegetable garden. So in here you have like the artifice, which is anticipating nature. So this polychromy of the marble anticipates rows of aubergines, tomatoes, zucchini.
This is a project that I developed in Stockholm in the last year. I've been working on a documentary on the suburban area of Stockholm, investigating through interviews, a series of fictional scenarios, the possibility on the negotiation between different audiences and governing institutions. The project is still ongoing, so I cannot. Most of the time, I spend most of the time really like meeting with people and gathering information through, for instance, playful evenings or the construction of a publication. So we work with different mediums, and we work also, we tend to work in between different disciplines.
I feel that what's interesting about like this sequence of two projects, like the one that Sabrina was showing you in Stockholm and this one, is that at least in our opinion, they really show like what we mean when we say that we work between spatial and relational practices. Because like if Sol Sueco was perhaps like a pure relational practice, because it was about really constructing a documentary together with people and trying to understand how documentary could be a technique to investigate public space. This one, that it seems something pretty special. At the end of the day, it was like a collaborative workshop that was realized in Vienna a few years ago in 2017 for the Design Week. And like the interesting thing about that is that we were trying to understand how something contemporary, how the construction process of something contemporary could trigger an engagement which happens in steps. It's like we were trying to trigger social dynamics in this peripheral area of the city, and we were very close to a kindergarten. And so every day, at the end of the day, we wanted to convey the feeling of completion. So we were like envisioning a series of animals, of fantastic figures that would slowly populate the square. And like every day, at the end of like the school day, the kids would come back and would see like a crocodile or a snake. Such a playful process required quite a serious architectural planning, but in a way, it allowed us to engage effectively with like kids, residents, and like multiple stakeholders. So it was really, at the end of the day, a relational tool for us. And this is something that we are very interested every time we make a project. This is the last project we made. And like the one you saw before is a painting that one of the residents overlooking this installation gave us at the end of the construction of it. And we were really happy, that like someone, in a way, engaged really with the aesthetic of the piece that we produced. We were really fascinated by the possibility of constructing sophisticated, abstract, yet recognizable aesthetics. So what, as Sabrina was saying, what does it mean to play with the language of everyday objects? What does it mean to construct something starting from like the metallic endings to icing cakes? So how do you need to process them? So how can you start? How can you play like with their proportions, with their purpose, with their meaning? Which are the processes that are required to transform them into architectural artifacts?
What we've been working on this project as well was the fact of different craft and playing with different scales. The welding process took over like 6 months to work on, and at the end with the students we started to like engage in the public space in different ways. We were like, actually the fact that it was a parking lot allowed us also to understand dynamics that for us they were new. Parks where, you know, cars were parking underneath to cover from the sun. People were coming there to barbecue in the afternoon. So for us, it's very important that at the beginning of each project, we don't give a certain kind, a very specific use of the architecture itself, because it kind of allows us for different things to happen.
We believe that like somehow constructing interesting geometries and aesthetics, it is as important like as engaging with people, and that's why we were talking about playfulness, recognizability. And like and it's for us like really important to understand how like these sort of abstract compounds, as Sabrina was saying, like can almost like naturally, spontaneously invite people to perform and to do things below them. For example, what we feel that's very interesting about this, as you were saying, like people were spontaneously like organizing like lunches, looking for shadows like in the heat of Italian summer. This was in the outskirts of Rome. What's interesting is that like at first we thought that the piece was failing, because like the whole idea was really trying to construct a public space within a parking lot. And apart from like certain Sundays where cars wouldn't park below it, like, and people would be able to have lunches, like it was always fully packed. But right now, after an entire summer of informal occupation, the residents are actually asking, and they managed to convince the municipality to redesign all the stalls around the piece. So from a temporary informal intervention, now it's going to be transformed into a permanent one. And in a way, like something very playful, because like what we felt is that it was, again, very abstract, but on the other hand, people could engage with it. Like some of them, they got that it was coming from tools for pastry chefs. Some others saw that it was a spaceship station. But in a way, they were able to engage with it. And perhaps we think that this playful aesthetic played a role, like in convincing people to ask the municipality to keep it.
Therefore, it was very hard for us to pick up actually a title for this lecture. We wanted to play with different words, and therefore, what does it mean to design something that relates to narratives, or can we actually shape new narratives? This is a project that we worked in Bangkok for the Design Week. Those are car pieces, scrap pieces from shops, which are called the Siengong. They're very identitarian to a certain kind of neighborhood, which is called Talat Noi. There are mountains of objects, which actually were, since the Second World War, used and stored in certain kind of garages, and then nowadays they're coming out for how many there are, and they are selling all over the world. What we started to work on, it was actually a catalog of all the pieces in collaboration with the shop owners.
What we think that was interesting is that these mountains that are invading without intruding, they are invading but they are not intruding the public space. They represent almost like a built timeline of the neighborhood. Because like they really characterize the space, and I mean the pieces, they are organized apparently chaotically, but like the owners, they actually know where they are, and like that they somehow, these mountains, on one hand they have like a beautiful aesthetic, on the other hand they trigger quite an interesting ritual. First thing that like we were doing, like to conduct the project, was conducting a photographic survey and like putting together a series of portraits of human and mechanical settings, trying to catalog and locate where these places are, constructing a series of maps and trying like to give to the visitors of the design week like the locations of those mountains. So really trying to tell them, guys, you should look at them. Like one of the most interesting part of this neighborhood is not like really looking at the installations that are like normal for the design week, but really try to look for what's identitarian in the neighborhood.
I think the shift that we want to make as well, it was the kind of twisting the kind of audience that come to this design week, art galleries, and try to build up a network with the shop owners of an interchange or an exchange. We're gonna sell your pieces through an auction that becomes, at the same time, the car parts become almost art, art fragments, art pieces.
Because like after the photographic survey, perhaps if we go back, like what we did, the second act of the project was trying to reenact and to reinterpret the artificial landscape of Talat Noi. So in a way, we were trying to transform like these mountains into a geometrical pattern. So whose, let's say, whose aesthetics were also dictated by criteria of like organization, so to find the pieces slightly better. And like what we were doing, like we were constructing a series of performances that would blend utilitarian and artistic practices. And they were culminating into a long auction night where we were trying, as Sabrina was saying, to mix different audiences, and where like these pieces were sold both as actual functioning car parts and art pieces. I mean, I think they should have seen it. Maybe we, well.
I go back. I go back.
I think like, I mean, I think it's nice to see it.
How much is that one? Only 200.
แต่ละชิ้นก็มีสามารถไปประยุกต์ใช้เป็นของต่างๆได้เพราะว่ามันก็ยังมีคุณภาพที่ดีอยู่เหมือนเดิมครับ
How like the sellers that at first were reluctant, like they ended up at the end of the design week to understand that it was something very interesting for them to gather and for them like to face different audiences. And something that was really trying to celebrate this accumulation of objects, like these gestures, these behaviors, like as unexpected forms of beauty, simultaneously enhancing like the commercial like nature that generated them. So that's why the dual nature, like artistic and utilitarian practices. I mean, just like few glimpses of the process, and that like it was a very interesting night.
The last project that we would like to show you is Gastronomic Palapa. It's a pavilion that we worked on in Mexico City for Mextropoli, which is a big festival that is organized every year. What we started to look at was the kind of relationship that we have with food. Ourselves as Italians, we kind of direct, when we think about conviviality, a sense of togetherness, we think about going to markets, eat together. This is a painting by Guttuso, an Italian painter, and we have a kind of tradition, moreover in the south of Italy, to work with edible materials that becomes almost like statuary pieces in our home, in our domestic space. And therefore, we started collecting from far away. We were based in London. We were starting looking on eBay, and we started looking on a series of postcards that kind of related to Mexico. What could, also for us, it was important to understand how a city, a culture can be portrayed through artifacts and objects. The ristras of the chili ristras are then started to pop up more and more, and we started to look at the history of how it was used and how it could actually become almost like an architectural starting point, a structural moment in our design process. And therefore we started, the last thing, we started looking at the type of different chilies that could be dried out and how long was first of all the temperature needed for that, the kind of length in time of how long does it take a chili to go from green to red, and what kind of shapes of different iteration do you get through these different typologies.
Yeah, maybe. I think in a way it drove inspiration from what we were saying at the beginning, this fascination with objects and this attempt to construct architectures with materials that don't usually belong to our discipline. So edible materials, but things that in a way have behaviors which are radically different than what we used to consider in architectural material. And so to transform what otherwise is conventionally considered an architecture into an infrastructure. So, and these are, we didn't invent anything. Just these are for us amazing typologies, the dryers of codfishes in Norway. And they have a very interesting atmosphere. I don't know if any one of you have ever been inside one of them. But really, this idea of being overwhelmed, but with all the senses, also the smells, not only by looking at them, is super interesting. And also having this sort of alive ceiling, and how you can play with certain things to construct very unexpected forms of decoration. This is north of Italy, for example, where it's quite traditional to leave the corn to dry on balconies and on terraces. And this is some.
The church facade that becomes also a place to dry different ingredients. So it was the dichotomy between different type of architectures and the type of programs that you can intervene in those.
But also how you can construct decorations by playing with a living process, which is something that is drying out. And so that's why, which are the material for these interventions? So we said, okay, let's construct something which is built on one hand with metal, but on the other hand with dried chilies. And then the story, is quite long, because we were supposed to build that in 2020, so at the beginning of the pandemic, and it was supposed to be a dryer. But it was postponed because of the pandemic, and so it was built during the wet season. So we had to transform it from a dryer to a public pantry, where chilies would be already dried. And so we were using also another material, the sponge, actually, to construct a sort of voluminous thing. Because again, how do you start thinking geometrically, formally, compositionally about chilies? How they get transformed into something that populates a piece of architecture which is more conventionally designed.
The other thing that we wanted to take into account was the kind of interaction with the space, and therefore, due to also to the hot climate, we wanted to also cook in the space or allow people to sit down, spend time in the pavilion itself. So these red tongues that you see here, they are tables that we started to implement in the final design, and it's okay. And then we slowly started from the structure to hang all the 13,000 chilies one by one. And we also worked on when you were coming in, it was almost like a cathedral of a really strong powerful chilliness.
Oh, it's, well, chilliness is quite a good word. Like, well, I mean, what we think it's nice about it is that on one hand, it was like really, let's say, very abstract, because like somehow the shape, or like the series of metal portals, like the shadow that they would project, like on the ground, like it was like really like walking within like a geometrical piece. I mean, it was interesting. So, but on the other hand, like it was very, again, recognizable or very organic, and the whole thing is that like these lines, so the portals and the shadows were just an infrastructure for something like way more expressive to happen. Like the tables that Sabrina was referring to, like from a linguistic point of view for us, like the table is one of the most interesting thing. Like if you refer to the word that denotates a table in Spanish, mesa, so in Mexican culture as well, like it's very interesting because etymologically it comes from misa, which is like the mass, the religious celebration. So the idea that like the table is the support for something even beyond convivial, like almost like sacred, that happens on top of it. And so that's why like all the openings, apart from the one in front, perhaps if we go back, like we decided to put the table as almost like obstructions, like meaning you couldn't enter in here. Like you can't enter within the pavilion, like from the openings, but like you have these tables that put together the interior and the exterior. So I can't enter, I see you, and I can sit at your same table.
Yeah, it was a way also to direct the people and the public. And at the end of the 3 months of installation, we asked, actually we pushed anyone to take back home a bunch of chilies with them. So actually the architecture could be eaten, could be deconstructed and used.
Yeah, I think it's something crucial for us, like because we work a lot with the temporary structures, and sometimes we have the aim that we have the hope that they'll become permanent, as like the story of what we were telling you at the beginning, like that piece, the Osigolosi, the one with the metallic cones, that like it was really, I mean, but the whole point for us is not even like the thing becoming permanent, is the thing really transforming permanently a parking lot into a public space. But otherwise, ephemerality, temporality is something that I feel like that our generation embraces quite a lot. But then we need to understand that temporality like implies dismantling, and like dismantling logistics, they have a cost, like in all senses. And so somehow every time you design something, if you already think about how it's going to be dismantled, and if you make like this dismantling not something that is related to the construction process performed by the workers, which is then alien to what like the public, the audience does with your piece, we feel it's something important to focus on. So this idea of having people physically taking home a piece of the pavilion, physically eating it, consuming it, we felt that was the main performative part of it. Like a necessary one, as you were saying. And I think that from our side, that's all. So thank you very much.
It was so long that we just like yeah. Yeah, so we both teach in 2 different universities, so yeah, we try to adapt ourselves and our schedule to this kind of projects. I think that many of us in architecture at this stage, if not in practice, the main issue is how to continue to work on this kind of like ephemeral, playful projects through competitions, and therefore a lot of time is a work in progress in applying to this kind of different contents. But nowadays we're getting few projects, so it's a sort of balance between the two. Yeah, sometimes with students we work I mean, mostly with students, we investigate, and it's more like experimental in the way that we try to do things. Yeah, but it's kind of it's in dialogue, the teaching that we do and the projects that we try to create.
Yeah, I feel it's quite hard to define what's on the side of what. Like the idea, I mean, of course, like it depends to a lot of things, to a lot of contingency. But I guess that like no one of us could see himself or herself like either without the practice or without the teaching. Like it would be, I mean, because teaching is a way of like being in contact with a lot of interesting things and with a lot of interesting processes, with a lot of, I mean, we are not that old, but we are no longer that young. So like being in contact with people that are like always younger than us, with fresher ideas, with fresher understanding of what surrounds us, like we feel it's vital. But on the other hand, like I feel that our discipline, like as a lot of other spatial or artistic or relational disciplines, wouldn't make any sense only within academia. And for example, something like even the courses that we teach in academia, especially the ones that we are teaching together in workshops, and now we like with this new course that we start to teach at the Royal College of Arts in London, are really obsessed with reality. Like we are always encourage students to test first-hand ideas in the real world and to try understanding how things can be implemented and can be seen, recorded, tried against real context. So almost like to, not even to simulate, but like to initiate practices.
I think that the challenge for us now is that we lived a lot in this, like, well, we lived 2 years in Bangkok. We're coming from Italy, I mean, from the south. We explore a bit the south of the world, in South America as well. We chose this location because they offer a level of informality and a level of like self-direction in architecture that is rare to find in London, for example. So for us now, the challenge is also to experiment more in the urban scape of like a city like London that is very like strict in some parameters. Yeah.
A lot of times it seems that such a context prevents like creativity, or like that it's really hard to make attempts or to try out things.
Yeah.
I mean, for example, for such a thing, like at the end of the day, we are not experts of chili varieties. So like the first thing, like rather than going like to an artisan that will give you suggestions about like the type of plaster that you need to do, like you're gonna go to a market with someone that is really knowledgeable about it, and then you're going to try to understand like which are the materials that you need to take into account. Or like even and I mean, for example, in here, like the fact that we had to in here, the fact that we had to build it during wet season, we had to understand the structural weight of chilies and like what happens when it rains, and so like which are the sponges that would like somehow retain water a bit less so that they are bearable for the. It's about like combining a lot of professionals that go beyond our world, I would say, and something that also happens like is that a lot of these things are not, of course, like they are not completely self-constructed. I mean, this project was quite huge. It was like a 20 meters, 9 meters height pavilion. So of course you have professional workers. But then the idea is always trying to attract crowds and finding ways for them to participate to the construction of it. Like for instance, it was interesting. Like when we had to assemble it, we had to assemble like all the chilies in a couple of nights with 40 volunteers. And it was like really, for us, like it was an interesting performance that became part of the construction of it. It became fundamental. So both the assembling and the disassembling, and like through these processes, you really somehow put people closer to the kind of architectural ideas that you have. And you try to understand how you never make projects for architects. So like how like you can really talk to people and you can really like involve them either directly, physically, or like how you can create something that would really invite them to do things that you can just address without like determining them.
I think maybe if is referring to also communities. I think it's really challenging to, when architects always say, oh, we work with communities. We engage with the public sphere through this and this workshop. I think what is very important for us is the long-term presence in those places, and therefore sometimes it's very tricky, because when you invade someone else's space, someone else's culture, someone else's environment, then your absence of leaving is much more felt than the actual process that you worked on during 2 or 3 months. So both in South America and in the south of Italy, we go there yearly. Now it's 4 or 5 years. So we tend to try to keep engaged through emails, but also actually letters of people, like the old generation that stays more over in the south of Italy are writing postcard, we send it back. We're yeah, we're coming this summer. And then it's actually a way to invite the students from all over the world that will never have a chance to go to these small really villages to experience that, and vice versa. So the people that are there are they are animating themselves again with the bars, with the Airbnb, because people sleep there as well.
No, but a few words about this, because I feel it's a very interesting example, and it shows how something beyond this idea, of course, to keep contact with other media, how architecture can play a role in that sense. This is a project which is part of something very interesting. You should look at it, called La Rivoluzione delle Seppie, that it translates into Squid's Revolution. So we were part of it for a bit, but they're a group of people that are working on urban regeneration in south of Italy, and especially in a small town called Belmonte, which is what we call in Italy a dying town, meaning that all the, let's say, only old people are there, all new generations left the town, which is very beautiful. It overlooks the sea, but somehow no one is there. And so the whole point is trying to understand how to not lose completely the legacy of such a space. But so these guys, they managed to gather a group of super interesting people coming from everywhere in Europe, academics, practitioners, intellectuals, and it would be super interesting. And they would gather within this abandoned building, and they would conduct symposium, they would have lectures, they would have think tanks. It was all interesting, but it was very detached from the people that would live in the neighborhood. And it was and every time somehow they were trying to convince the municipality to invest money on this abandoned building where they would gather, but then the people would say, but why? Why do we need to do that? What's the point? Is it really that abandoned? We've never been. So they were asking us somehow to make an intervention in the garden. There was the garden of this building that was completely abandoned, full of construction debris. So a lot of concrete, pieces of metal, pieces of wood. So we said well, what do we do? How do we really convince the population of this village to come to see the building and to understand that it needs something, and how do we really initiate a dialogue with us? And the solution at the end of the day was very intuitive. Let's make a meal. Let's do something super cheap. So this is cork. So this is cork. So what we did is the brownish thing that you see on the ground is cork. So the debris, the construction debris, so the concrete, the metal, the wood, they were constructing a topography that would naturally involve people to sit down, and that would naturally have tables in the middle. It was just super hard, so you would never sit on it. But if you cover it with cork and then it becomes soft, the landscape becomes an amazing chair for people to sit down. And so that's why then, okay, I need to have a very low table. And how can I make a table? Unfortunately, we didn't include pictures, but this table we're mirroring, we're reflecting at the sunset overlooking the sea was an amazing abstract installation. But people would come in there and would say, okay, what do I do with it? But then you invite them. You make a lunch. You somehow really involve them. Now, this garden has been completely refurbished. So after that, professionals would come in there. I mean, in our opinion, it's not as nice as the installation we did, but that's another story. But it's refurbished. And it was something very, very simple, not intellectual at all. It was a meal, organized performatively, unconventionally, but with tomatoes, with squids, in an abandoned place that and through that, we managed to put the community closer and to convince about the validity of the project that this squid revolution was doing.
Good end to go to dinner. is if there is a use when you have buildings between demolition and completion.
No, of course, like, and perhaps like sometimes, again, like unfortunately, architecture, and especially when it relates to the historical heritage or like to urban pieces, it goes way beyond like our control. Like you need to deal with municipalities, you need to convince a lot of stakeholders about, again, the validity of what you want to do. And so that's why we feel that sometimes constructing temporary scenographies or like making temporary interventions within buildings that are aiming to be transformed or that are aiming to be preserved, like helps a lot. Because like you somehow you really invite people to actually see them firsthand. Because like, again, a lot of decisions about like, at least like in Italy, a lot of decisions about like buildings and things that, again, need to be either demolished or preserved are taken on paper without really anyone that would somehow need to have quite a clear picture of what's going on. That person wouldn't go there, and like, or like citizens wouldn't know a lot about them. And then like what we feel is that sometimes proper architectural interventions take a lot of time. They're very slow. So somehow people are fed up and they don't see results. So what we feel that like temporality, even within like existing buildings that are aiming for something, let's say, more stable, could be really used as a tool to invite multiple stakeholders and to, let's say, think to get to make tests also. Because as we were saying, like, what does it mean to work with community? How do we know if something is a sort of purpose, a function, or a type of intervention would work out? Like, let's just try it. Why don't we really, in that sense, we're not scenographers. Like, but like, we say that we work a lot with stage sets and with scenographies because we love the physicality of things. We love, like, one-to-one, like, interventions, like, because we always feel that, again, when architects are so sure about the kind of programs and movements and gestures that will happen, like, within their proposals, well, we're a bit of a fool, like, meaning like we need to see people doing them. So we need to try out, we need to test. And temporality in that sense is a really good like tool to test the validity of our ideas for ourselves as architects, for people, and like for stakeholders belonging to the organs that take decisions. I don't know if it answers your question.
In London, they use as well, like many buildings, moreover in the east, for like artist residency and artist studios in between the moments when they need to be, you know, get rid of all the offices, and in the moment when they are just before knocking it down 1 or 2 years, they allow for like artists to work there. And then it's also like a tricky situation because then people live there, like live and work in those buildings. Rent goes up at the end, and but it's a very interesting question actually to think about. Yeah. I think that that's a very good question as well. Yeah, when is enough? I think one main issue at the beginning of each project is the fact that the budget is so low that you do it for passion. And therefore, because we have a lot of passion, I think, we could go on and on and on. But what constrains us sometimes is really like this series of tests. So we actually have like not always the same path and methodology of working, but like in the first stage we collect, we gather information as everyone. Second stage is like trying out and collaborating with like people that make something. So either it's one-to-one or like a fragment of the actual building that we want to propose. And then the third action is like when you have a site and you have people, audiences, you try out different series of actions. I don't know if our projects can be actually described as ending at one point. They often get moved, literally on wheels. and they go to other spots to interact in a different way. So, yeah. No, so actually, like the design. I know how to answer this from a design point of view. Like you stop the design when you want to actually try out an action on people.
I feel like we are also architects, like what we're trying to say, like things, especially the most designed ones, are planned completely in advance. It's not that like geometries, like construction drawings, assembling processes are all planned in advance. It's like from an intellectual point of view, you need to be ready to be there, and at some point say, you know what, like I'm not gonna complete it, which is not very easy because like you've designed it, like you've managed to find the permission of doing it. You managed to find the budget. You are there. You're building it. So really, I'm not going to complete it. It's like, it's quite tough somehow. I mean, but then you understand that perhaps like just going beyond would be selfish. And in my opinion, something that maybe can describe it very easily is what happened in here. So this project in Vienna, that like, as like described in this GIF, like there were several days, so you will have a crocodile, then you will have turtles, then you will have a fish, like, you know, that they interlock and they populate the whole like square. It was constructed with tape. I mean, during the 4th day, there was a storm. It destroyed it completely. So like the 5th day, we said, okay, what do we do? Like, do we rebuild it? Or because we were hoping like to have it there at least like for 10 days, like. And it's like we didn't, but then like the very same night, this thing happened. There was like one of the residents living in these like buildings that like came to us and like because they saw us like very sad in there, like really, okay, what are we doing? And like they came to us and they told us that like they took like a lot of pictures about the carpet and they were really using them like to ask again the municipality to finally do something on top of that gray square. So we looked at ourselves, okay, that's enough. I mean, we didn't do the fish, we did just the crocodile and the turtles, but they were enough. And I mean, of course, like in all lectures, we'll include the plan because we want to show you how amazingly we planned the interlocking between different animals that never happened. Like that poor fish which is on top never saw the light. And we still think about it. But it wasn't, so sometimes like contingencies, it rains. But then you, as Sabrina was saying, people. And even like when we very romantically, we are telling you that like this thing most likely will say, and it's actually true because the residents are asking and convincing the municipality to leave it there and to redesign the stalls around it. Yes, it's true. But you know which is the only reason why the municipality in the first place said yes? They don't have money to dismantle it. Dismantling it has a cost. So for them, like after the residents came there, they asked them, then they made a calculation and it's actually way cheaper like to just like redesign the stalls to leave it there than dismantling it.
But I think it's like really to put in communication people like us that knows the tool or should know the tools of the urban public space and actually the power to the people that live there, citizen, they appropriate the space on a daily basis. But then chance, that's a good, that's a good point, yeah.
And that's why we encourage students like to deal like with reality and to insert projects in reality from the very, very beginning, because like it's really an effort, like understanding that you need to give up with something that you've planned so long, that like you've put a lot of energy in it. And that's also why, but it's something that we need to face. Like world is very, very fast. Architecture, most of the cases when you want to construct physical stuff in real places, especially in public spaces, so working with like public entities and not like with private owners, is very slow, very mediated, and it's an issue. Like for people like us that like even unconsciously we live very fast. Like we are used to deal with things that are happening very, very fast. And we love architecture, but like we cannot just wait like 5 years to see something completed. Because like in 5 years, it'll be very, very old. And like we are all obsessed with doing things that are cutting edge, that are always like original and novel in the moment where people use them.
Sorry, I'm just I think that, so we're mostly there in the first phase, and for the opening, we tend to be there. So actually it's a partial or bias understanding, because we meet them with the people in that month or in that week. But for example, for this project, you see here where there is like there is a security guard at the corner. We were just around there with a drone, taking some picture, trying to, and then this guy came out and said, "Do you know who did this building?" And we're like, "No, we don't know, no." And then he was like, "Some chef who are also architects." And we're like, "Okay, that's interesting." So I think like he was like reading this as a sort of like installation done by yeah, like chef makers, half builders. I think most of our, like how we work in terms of aesthetics is something new. For example, in some parts of Rome, for instance, and therefore the first reaction is more like, what is this? What is it used for? My mom comes to me daily basis saying, what is it? What are you doing? Because the actual like outcome, I think the strength of we're visual people, we're inundated and we have vomiting images in front of us all the time, is something new, is something like very hard to understand. Second, I think it's like a lot of comments are on the location. So what do you expect us, what is this? What do you expect us to do in there? There is, first of all, a question, and that is actually very interesting, that people ask us how to use it, because this is the tendency most of the time, I think. The architects say, oh, dictate, you know, in a way, this is going to be a beautiful, like, lecture hall. And then maybe people want to use it for, like, a beer tasting, you know. So the actual, like, questioning of the space from the people is very interesting. It's something that we take into account. I don't know if you...
I mean, and like public space is always something like very complex, like full of contrasting dynamics, and that's why I was saying true story is that at the end of the day, municipality doesn't have money to move it, so perhaps like, well, because I mean, until I see it there permanently, I'm not gonna be 100% sure, but I'm saying like, of course, there were residents perhaps like living in there, like that since they liked it, and for sure there were people that didn't like it, but perhaps most of them, they liked it. We were good at designing it, or we were lucky. They wanted it there. But like people, a lot of people that are just going there for work, and so they don't really care about how the area looks like, and they just want to park their car quite close to their workplace, they'll be against it. So, and I mean, but these you need to, of course, like you need to accept it, you need to embrace it, and you need to understand that it's always about negotiating something. There are, of course, certain things that are quite physical, quite spontaneous, like providing shadow. Providing like this thing, for example, like everyone that was seeing it would say, well, like it's constructed with metal, so it's gonna be crazily hot below it. But then you go below it, and of course, like it has the funny shape. We like the icing, the pieces to do the icing on cakes. But like if you think about it, they are like chimneys. So in terms of ventilation, they work quite well. Because like the air would come from below, and then and then also, like, of course, there are metallic surfaces, but they are not like the ones of cars, which are flat. They're inclined. So the sun would never hit them properly. So it was like, even at midday in August, it was quite nice to be below it. So, I mean, there are like certain things that belong to our physicality and to our, let's say, intuitive way of doing things that are really shared. And then as Sabrina was saying, like, I feel that especially if you want to do extravagant objects, you need to really rely on those. Because like you're not going to tell to people how to use things, but you're going to provide certain features that would naturally, let's say, address or suggest certain behaviors. And that's why, for example, we were talking about softness when it came to the... You might not like the landscape, but it's soft. And we're not going to argue if it's soft or not. It is. And it's comfortable. And tomatoes were good. So people would like... If you get what I mean, no? Like there are... To a certain extent, there are certain things that you can't control, and it's totally fine. You're gonna deal like with contrasting like dynamics. Sometimes will be better for you. Sometimes you won't manage to convince people. Sometimes you would convince people, but you won't convince the ones that are taking decisions. So it's gonna go away anyway. I mean, at the end of the day, like those things are we believe, without like making it too big, like, but we believe that like these things are playful devices for spatial activism. Like at the end of the day, they are like political acts. Like trying, like with our tools, like being ironic, being light, being playful, like to deal with people, and so together with people that want to use them in a specific way and like get fond of them, trying to do something political, which is something that needs to embrace like successes and failures.
From an organizational point of view, for example, Gastronomic Palapa, which was done in Mexico City, was a project that we actually stopped and we got hold on when in Europe it was already starting to have more restrictions. In Mexico, it wasn't yet. So we flew to Mexico and they were like, we're going to go ahead with the festival anyway. And we said to ourselves, hold on, let's stop here 1 second. We don't think it's like actually proper to celebrate the public space in a moment of like, you know, such a dangerous situation all over the world. The kind of shift that we made in our daily activities is like the type of collaboration that we built up, the network that we got on, like we work a lot with now people, like we get to meet people from all over the world. And we work a lot in the process of designing and selecting references from like also from afar.
I mean, I feel that like we don't know in the end, no? We are like, and we are scared a bit about it, like because like we are like very, let's say, physical people, meaning like we like to engage, and we believe that especially public space needs to rely on physical engagement. We hate online lectures, online teaching, online meeting, online. But we do believe that, like, of course, we were forced to be exposed to them, and they opened up a lot of opportunities, but they also really came with the risk of stiffening, no? Some emotional singularities, social capabilities, but they're part, like even unconsciously, they're now part of our equipment. How to really hybridize them with these things that are purely physical, we don't know yet. Like it's actually something that perhaps like ask us in a year. Like now, really, like we give a presentation like a couple of days ago about like this new studio that we have at the Royal College of Art, which is going to be called Convivialism, and that is really asking students this question, like how to be truly contemporary in approaching like bodily engagement and in approaching like the implementation of like relational digital technologies in on a daily basis.
One thing that we found super interesting is these new platforms of archiving fragments of architecture, either 3D scanned or using photogrammetry. I think also with students, it was incredible to build such a like archive online that can be shared immediately. So a student was working and 3D scanning a fragment in his house in China and then get transferred straight to Stockholm, you know. So that was like a twist that we would like to implement in the years to come.
Yeah, we were doing like a summer school in Venice last year at the Venice Biennale. No, 2 years ago, I don't remember. Like, and it was about constructing table, but of course we will have only online students in different parts of the world. So we were asking them to imagine, like, and to construct and to populate with objects, like communal tables. So these guys, you would be like, one guy was in Stockholm, one guy was in Hong Kong. So they would 3D scan objects from their places, and then they would construct digital models of these tables, and then they would make animations about them. But like, as Sabrina was saying, like we wanted to push this sort of exchange further, and perhaps like it's our take on it. We really wanted to insert a level of physicality. So really we would ask students to send, let's say, hybrid postcards. Like if I 3D scan a mushroom in my house in Hong Kong and then I send it to you in Stockholm and then you 3D print it, you'll have something if you get what I mean, no? So, and sometimes it's about like, it's about thinking, it's thinking about like media or about tools, and it's about really understanding which is like the relational power of certain digital tools and which is their impact on our physical behaviors. We don't really have like built projects about it. Hopefully soon something will happen.